I was born and raised Methodist, and I lived in Baltimore City the first 12 years of my life. My family was a family that came to Maryland in the 1660s, and it wasn't until my parents moved in 1972 that anybody in my family left the state of Maryland. And so here I was, this little girl born in 1959, in this Methodist world, surrounded by Jesus. And that becomes the template for what I wind up exploring in this book. The way that I actually proceeded with this is really twofold. And this is something I think that I'm I can be an invitation to others. And that is, I literally sat down with 6 or 7, I can't remember exactly how many pieces of paper it was in front of me, uh, pieces of paper in front of me. And I wrote at the top of the page, age under 5. So before I started kindergarten. And then the next thing was, 6 to 13, basically elementary school. And the next paper had at the top adolescence, 14, 15, 16 years old. And then high school, and then finally, college, early 20s, and so forth. So I had my life, I sort of divided my life up into these distinctive phases on these pieces of paper. And I was then asked myself the question, what is my primary memory of Jesus that I can write down on each one of these pages? And for the first page of being under 5 years old, I remembered something. I remembered sitting in a Sunday school classroom. I was maybe 3, perhaps 4 years old. It was in the basement of the Methodist church I went to in Baltimore. And I remember that the walls were painted green. The green color on the walls was paint that the United Methodist Church had gotten as Army surplus paint after World War II. It's a very distinctive color of green. I think the United Methodist Church painted the entire denomination with that Army surplus paint after World War II. But that was my Sunday school classroom, was that green color. And we were sitting there on the floor, and our Sunday school teacher, Miss Jean, was sitting in a little teeny tiny chair, and she was telling us a story about how Jesus called all the little children to be with him. And she held up a picture, and the picture was of Jesus surrounded by children. And there in that picture, there was a little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. Not exactly what you would find in Israel 2,000 years ago, all those little blonde hair, blue eyed girls, but nevertheless, she was there. And I looked at that picture and I saw myself, and I went, oh my gosh, that's me. And I immediately saw what she was doing, and that is, she was very close to Jesus, and her head was leaning right towards his shoulder. And that is one of my very first memories of Jesus, was identifying with a picture that my preschool Sunday school teacher held up while telling us how Jesus loved the little children. And so that's what I did for each one of these pieces of paper, is I tried to recapture some dominant memory, something that stood out above all others in that particular time frame of how I thought about Jesus. And those 6 pieces of paper become the names in the subtitle, become the themes, the way I thought about Jesus in these 6 different periods of my life. And so that little girl in the picture of Jesus, um, what I realized from that moment is that Jesus was my friend. And that was my first ever image of Jesus. As I went through, then elementary school became Jesus is my teacher. I encountered, as a adolescent, the idea of Jesus as a savior. College was marked by an absolutely idealistic, sort of over the top devotion that I developed to Jesus being my Lord. In chapter 5, which is a part of my life that roughly takes place in seminary and graduate school, it's about how I understood that Jesus was the way, but how I got on a wrong way and needed to turn around and come back. And then finally, that in my more recent experience, Jesus is a presence, and so a much more kind of mystical sort of reality of Jesus in that last chapter. So, freeing Jesus. The book opens with a story about me in the Washington National Cathedral in 2013. And I was kneeling in front of a small side altar in a chapel at the Washington National Cathedral. And I heard a voice. And the voice seemed to come from the painting above the altar, which is a huge, beautiful painting of Jesus from about 100 years ago. And I heard this voice say, "Get me out of here." And when I heard the voice, I thought it was so distinctive. And here's a weird thing, how often have you heard somebody at Riverside Church say that they heard a voice from a painting? Um, so anyway, I heard a voice from a painting of Jesus that said, "Get me out of here." And I thought I was somebody else in the cathedral. And so I went back to praying. And a second time I heard the same voice, "Get me out of here." And at that point, I looked up at the painting and I said, "Jesus, is that you?" And the third time I heard, "Get me out of here." I was so completely freaked out that I bolted out of the cathedral. And I was sort of wondering while I was running out the door how I was going to get the painting into my purse, because it was like, should I steal the painting? What is this all about? And I told my husband this story. And ever since we talk about it sometimes as Richard calls it, that time that Jesus asked you to spring him from the slammer. And I I I kept it to myself for a long time. One, because you don't hear liberal Protestant women talking about talking paintings very often, but two, and liberal Protestants freak out about those kinds of experiences when you share them in church. But two, I really didn't want to offend anybody. Certainly didn't want to offend my friends at the Washington National Cathedral. Although I worried, that Jesus might not have just been talking to me, but might be talking to every visitor who comes into the cathedral to get him out of there. And I wanted to reflect on, what that meant. And that becomes the frame for the book and the frame for the telling of my memoir theology.